right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and to talk to you all about the state of millennial voters. So, as we know, today, young voters are overwhelmingly liberal. I don't think anybody here is shocked to hear that. There's this one saying that if you're liberal at 20, you have no heart, and if you're conservative at 20, oh my goodness, if you're not liberal at 20, you have no heart. If you're not conservative at 40, you have no brain. And I think that saying exists for a reason. It's been a general trend throughout history that young voters have always been more left-leaning than their older counterparts. However, even considering that fact, it is still true that today, young voters are still even more likely to be liberal than older generations. In 2002, 27% of millennial voters identified as Republican. Not terrible, not great, kind of middle of the road. I don't know about you all, but that's sort of what I would expect it to be at. If you fast forward to 2017, however, those numbers dropped to a mere 17%. Something very strange is happening here that I don't think we've seen before, even when we account for the fact that new, younger millennial voters are turning 18 and becoming part of the statistic. The issue is that my generation is actually getting more liberal as we get older. Don't let Trump's election fool you. The Overton window, the acceptable mainstream views in our society are shifting steadily leftward. You don't need to be a genius to figure that out. All you need to do is turn on the TV and see that it has become mainstream in the Democratic Party to advocate for literal socialism. We see this all the time from people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, and guess what? Their support is strongest among young voters. The thing with millennials, though, is that we also tend not to vote very much. Our voter participation rate is around in the mid-40s. So I think for a lot of people, especially Republican conservative candidates, you might look at millennials and see a group of people who are not only not very likely to vote, but if they do vote, aren't very likely to vote for you. So I understand in campaigns, limited resources are a factor. You have to make tough decisions about where to best spend your time. But the problem is that for the longevity of the conservative or libertarian movement, we can't just essentially give up on an entire generation of voters. Because if this is what young voters look like today, and we do nothing about this, what are things going to look like in 20 years or even 40 years? And the thing is, even if we account for the fact that these young voters will probably, at least to some extent, get more conservative as they get older, as we all probably have, these voters are so far left currently that even if a few of them come around and become a little bit more moderate, what that may end up meaning is that they're simply more of a Hillary Clinton supporter instead of a full-on AOC supporter. And I don't know about you all, but that's still not where I would ideally like to see things go. So why is this happening? Well, to be honest, and I don't mean to sound negative, I'm not trying to paint a doomy, gloomy picture here. I just think that to properly address a problem, we first need to recognize it. The left, especially progressives, have essentially taken over every single institution that millennials interact with on a daily basis. If you watch a TV show or a movie, if you follow a celebrity on social media, if you listen to the mainstream media, if you check out what kinds of causes celebrities or brands or athletes are endorsing, if you attend your average middle school, high school, or don't even get me started about universities, because we'll get to that, but you're not very likely to hear viewpoints that are pro-liberty, pro-small government, or pro-individual freedom. The left has so fully taken control over the mainstream discourse. Think about it. They have actually managed to convince people that supporting the duly elected sitting president is controversial. What this means is that there is an entire generation out there, unfortunately my generation, who has grown up with the unchallenged narrative that tells them that capitalism is evil. Wealth and success is akin to greed, that the government, not charity, is the only and best way to help people, and that the most charitable thing that you as an individual can do is to vote to take away other people's rights, especially their property rights. And I would love to say that I'm being hyperbolic, but unfortunately I'm not. I talk to these young voters every day, and this is what they are saying. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that conservatives have made is something that Candace Owens, if you're familiar with her, talks about a lot, is giving up the education system to the left. Today, it's estimated that the Democrat voting academics now outnumber Republican colleagues 9-1. And it's not a coincidence that on these college campuses, support for Bernie Sanders and for socialist policies, we're talking single-payer healthcare system, free university, it's astronomical. And I would love to say that professors are able to just leave their politics at the door and come in and teach students objectively, but if we look at what the numbers, unfortunately, that's not what's happening. According to one 2009 study from the Higher Education Research Institute, the number of students who said their political views were liberal or far left jumped 9.2 percentage points from their freshman to senior year. That's 10 years ago. Imagine what that number is like now. So many young people today have learned about capitalism from people who hate capitalism. And whenever I talk about the bias in universities, so many people like to tell me, well, if all of the college graduates are voting for the left and if all the academics are voting for the left, doesn't that tell you something about what the intelligent vote should be? I don't know how you guys feel about this, but personally, I just don't put that much stock into what fiscal policies gender studies academics support. It's just not where I would like to see the country led by. And the truth is, if we actually break down college students by majors, we see an interesting pattern emerge. The more educated people are about markets and the way capitalism functions, the more likely they are to reject socialism. Now, if you're at all engaged in voter outreach, this is such an important message. Let's throw some numbers out there just to better illustrate it. If you look at philosophy students, I don't think people would be surprised to know that 80% of them view socialism favorably. But if we turn and look around at economics majors, that number drops to 26%. If we look at the accountants, the number's way down in the 20% range. Essentially, what I'm trying to tell you all is that socialism excels among those who are trapped in echo chambers and who are, for lack of a better term, economically illiterate. And I'm not trying to be rude, I'm not trying to be condescending, because of course there are well-educated people who do support left-wing policies economically, fiscally, but it is a fact that the more people are educated about economics and finance, the more likely they will be to reject socialism, even if they're young, even if they're in college, and even if there's someone who gets their news from Stephen Colbert. These numbers hold up. So I'm not saying it will be easy, but it is necessary to reach these younger voters. And I think when we look at the data, what we're seeing more and more is that to get these young voters to come around, we're not just talking about outreach, we're talking about a full-on education campaign and making them understand how the free market can work for them, not just for the 1% that the left so often likes to demonize. Thank you.